Probably like all of you, we've been at a minimum vaguely familiar with Bjorn Lomborg and what he's been saying for some years. And much of what he says, and not to go further than what we have seen so far, I would imagine would resonate with all of us. He says things that are important, need to be said, critiques things that I can tell you as a former government official, I've seen firsthand, how things work and how slow and difficult things can be. But like anything that you see in a snippet like this, there's definitely biases that are built in. And I have to laugh at times, and just because of the, I wouldn't call it the cynicism of my own experiences, but it is the experience. When everybody is portrayed as anybody that's a regulator or doing their job is they're all selling permits and everybody's corrupt and systems are not going to work in a very simplistic explanation. Things like that make me call into question some of the other things that are said and the veracity and depth of the thinking that goes into some of the pronouncements. I don't want to monopolize the time. Just suffice to say that I think very good information, very good start. I can't fault Bjorn Lomborg for saying what he's saying, but I think the policy and the real on-the-ground answers to these problems are much more complicated than he's saying, and frankly, a lot of the numbers I saw I think are absurdly distorted.
Well, speaking of the numbers, I was intrigued with the estimates of what impact various agreements would have on how much climate change you might have avoided by spending certain amounts of money and so on. There was one, for example, if you implement the Kyoto Accord, you accomplish a few tenths or a tenth or a few hundredths of a degree of reduction in global warming by the end of the century. And these estimates are made on the basis of climate models, which are computer-based simulations that incorporate our best understanding of all of the processes which, taken together, form the climate that we experience. And they have their shortcomings. These models are not as accurate and reliable as we would like them to be. They are as reliable as we can make them at present. But on the other hand, I wanted to point out that the calculations that he quotes, to my knowledge, are fairly accurate. And I'm just speaking of the number that I mentioned, the impact of implementing Kyoto on reducing climate change. The economic estimates and the other areas and the cap and trade, as a climate scientist, I try and keep a boundary between the job of the scientist, which I think is to inform the policy debate, and actually advocating for a particular policy position. But maybe
I just want to know, wasn't it true that scientists used to promote global cooling? And if that's true, at what point in time did science decide to flip over and just promote global warming?
May I touch on that, please? As we know, climate changes from epoch to epoch naturally. Even if you're not changing, monkeying around with atmospheric composition, we know that climate changes. And in the mid-60s, especially in early 70s, a cooling trend was in evidence from the measurements. There was little doubt that there was some cooling going on. And so if you look at some of the headlines on newspapers and in Time magazine front pages, ice age is coming. It turned out that that was apparently one cycle of a natural variability of climate that occurs sort of independent of what we're doing to the system. And later it turned out the consensus was that cooling was due to the fact that all of the sulfate aerosols that we were emitting into the atmosphere from coal-fired power plants were creating a means of reflecting some of the incoming solar radiation away from the Earth that otherwise would have helped to keep it at its normal temperature. And so you had a temporary cooling as those aerosols continued to develop, and as we put scrubbers and other mechanisms on the plants, the aerosol emissions reduced, and in fact then the climate returned to its sort of natural state. So it was a reaction to just what was observed to be happening and some early anticipations of what might be the cause.